and how we can make it better. This hour, I'm going one-on-one with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey about how he is trying to clean up the graffiti that's all over Twitter's walls. Plus, speaking of Twitter, President Trump's use of the platform, he's publicizing his enemies list. John Brennan, just the first victim. We're going to get into that with Ralph Peters. Plus, there's been a backlash against new progressive star Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez because she shut reporters out of 2 public town halls. We're going to get into all of that this hour. But first, panicking? Who's panicking? Trump's media world says Robert Mueller's panicking. But if you look on Twitter, you might think it's President Trump, who's in a Twitter tizzy this morning, tweeting all sorts of things. Here's one example, attacking the failing New York Times, saying the paper's writing fake news. It's not. And he's comparing White House counsel Don McGahn, saying that the New York Times portrayed him as a John Dean type rat. Look, there's so much wrong with these tweets. He even misspells the word counsel. And it doesn't stop there. Here are 6 of the tweets today. At one point, he's comparing Mueller to Joseph McCarthy. You'd look at this if you were in some other foreign capital and you'd say, is the president okay? Is he all right? You know, I've been noticing this all week. The president live tweeting Fox more than he ever has before. We counted it up of his almost 100 tweets during the week. Dozens of those, at least 23 of them, came directly from Fox News coverage. Others were clearly inspired by Fox News. So before we begin, we wanted to take a look at what he's hearing on Fox, what people like Judge Jeanine Pirro are telling him through the TV. Pirro was taunting Robert Mueller on Saturday night, bemoaning poor Paul Manafort. And notice the word here, notice the word rat that she uses.
You're trying to get him to rat on the president of the United States. And you're panicking now, Bob. But you know, Bob, we're all getting tired of this. And this all comes down to your effort to get Donald Trump indicted, and you are panicking. You got nothing.
Okay, panicking. So who's really panicking? The woman who's taunting the prosecutor through the TV? Or is it the special counsel team that's just quietly doing its work? There have been no signs of Mueller panicking. But notice how Pirro fed that idea. She fed it to Rudy Giuliani a few minutes later, and then he happily repeated the panicking thing.
Does it tell you that Mueller is starting to panic and starting to get McGahn to work with him to tell McGahn, hey, look, the president's teeing you up for a fall? Who is this? What's going on?
Well, I think the best analysis would be that the Mueller team is panicking.
Okay, so do you see how this works? Do you see how the echo chamber or the mirror maze is happening? Now it's Mueller panicking. That's the new talking point, even though it's nonsensical. And speaking of nonsensical, Rudy Giuliani's TV tour is continuing. It's on Meet the Press. And Susan Glasser, a CNN Global Affairs analyst and staff writer with The New Yorker. Susan, what are the history books going to tell us about this weekend?
Well, you know, Brian, in some ways, I still feel like we're in the early chapter, maybe not the prologue, but the first chapter of the Donald Trump story. And, you know, we've hardly seen, for example, what the Mueller investigation is really going to result in. But there's just no question. I'm glad you highlighted what appears to be the increased Trumpian worries on his Twitter feed and his public statements. It looks like he is freaking out in a way that we haven't seen throughout his presidency. So, you know, I do feel like we're entering a new stage here. And, you know, people often compare Trump to a reality show. But to me, it's almost like the unreality show that's really kicking in here. Truth isn't truth. It's Mueller who is like McCarthy. It's the others who are panicking. It's really the opposite of reality that Trump is foisting on us at this point in time.
Sabrina, what's your take?
Well, look, this is a White House that has been navigating from one controversy to the next since the president his legislative agenda. Outside of tax reform, there's been no deal on healthcare, no deal on trade, no deal on immigration, no deal on infrastructure. The list goes on and on. There's not really a coherent foreign policy strategy either. So all that the president really has left is to try and harden his support within the base. And so a great deal of that requires a helping hand from Fox News and other conservative-friendly media outlets to try and essentially create an alternative narrative, call it the alternative facts universe, if you will, where he is successful, where Russia is not a factor, and where, frankly speaking, truth isn't truth.
And that's why Carlos is here as well. Carlos, you wrote about 6 pro-Trump books that you've read and reviewed, bless you, for the Washington Post. Let's show on screen some of these examples. These are Let Trump Be Trump and The Russia Hoax. Jeanine Pirro's book is one of them. These books, some of them have done really well. I mean, Pirro's book, Greg Jarrett's book, have been at the top of the bestseller lists, the New York Times bestseller list, by the way. So when you read these books, Carlos, what did you come away thinking about the effectiveness of the pro-Trump media world?
Well, right now there's 2 kinds of books being published on the Trump presidency. The sort of horrified outside observer books that feel Trump is, pretending the end of the republic, and then you have these pro-Trump books that really feed into this echo chamber to the point where you can't tell sometimes, if it begins with Trump's Twitter feed or the pro-Trump cable news shows or these books. But substantively, what you see is that they go after the same people Trump is going after. Former CIA Director Brennan is a major villain in the pro-Trump books, and these kind of truth isn't truth leaps of logic you see in the books as well. In The Russia Hoax by Greg Jarrett, he says basically Trump can't be obstructing justice because there's no injustice to obstruct. If he did nothing wrong, then why would he obstruct a probe into no wrongdoing? This is the kind of logic that you see materialize in these books.
Well, logic, or I guess logic in quote marks. But did you find these books to be persuasive at all? Can you understand why readers would come away feeling, hey, my guy's the victim of a deep state plot?
These books individually are not persuasive. They are useful collectively as a genre. They have these recurring ticks. They sound like Trump. They praise all the things that you think of as potentially negative aspects of the Trump presidency. Here are spun. Like his ignorance on policy issues is a great strength. There's this "I know you are, but what am I" kind of argument that runs through them.
Which is exactly what Jeanine Pirro's doing, saying Bob Mueller's panicking. I mean, you can almost see Trump's allies sweating. They're clearly concerned about what's going on, but they have to say Mueller's the one panicking. Let me just go real quick from cause to effect, because this new Quinnipiac poll has to be pointed out. This is a poll showing that 26% of Americans will side with Trump's enemy of the people talk about the press, while 65% say the press is an important part of democracy. Now let's break that down by party. The important part here is that half of Republicans will parrot Trump's line and say that the press is the enemy. Sabrina, your reaction to this polling?
Well, this is consistent with other polling that shows that Trump's attacks on the media are working, at least among Republicans. There have been other worrying surveys that show a majority of Republicans even support giving Trump the power to shut down elements of the media. But I do think that you are seeing somewhat of a ceiling with respect to how effective he is, because the majority of Americans still are supportive of the media and recognize just how vital the role of a free press is to the United States and to its democracy. So I think that is part of why you've seen him really play to the base. And the question becomes, in the 2018 midterms, or if you look ahead to 2020, is he going to be effective as an incumbent president in making the same argument that he did as a candidate? And it doesn't look like the polling supports that he will be.
You mentioned 2020, and I've been thinking even longer term than that. I was talking with political scientist Brian Klaus, an outspoken Trump critic. He was on my podcast this week, and he said, hey, look, think 2 decades from now. What is the impact of this enemy rhetoric going to be? Let me just play a little bit about what Brian Klaus said.
I mean, there's a poll out this week that shows that 26% of Americans do believe that the media is the enemy of the people. That doesn't end when Trump leaves office. And how many of those people are going to discount truthful, accurate reporting, not just for the next 2.5 years, but for the next 2.5 decades, for example?
That's the issue. And Susan, I don't think we know the answer. I don't think we know what the long-term effects are going to be exactly. But going back to Rudy and this truth isn't truth stuff from today, you know, Rudy's been out there saying, go ahead, Bob Mueller, release your report. We have our own report too. Is that how this is going to end? Two dueling reports, two narratives, and nobody will be able to agree on the truth?
Well, look, I think that's at this point the hope of Giuliani and the Trump legal team is that it ends in that fashion. What we don't know, of course, is what are the results of the November midterm elections going to be, and the timing of Mueller's report and what is contained in it, and if there is a change in the control of the House of Representatives, as now seems possible, if not likely, you certainly are going to see a much different approach from Congress and hearings. I believe that there will be overwhelming pressure on Democrats from their base to launch impeachment hearings. And so you could start to see an entirely different process kick in here. And by the way, speaking of unreality, that's why you have President Trump right now trying to create, in addition to his narrative around the rigged witch hunt, selling his supporters on a whole different alternate reality, the idea that not only is there not going to be a blue wave, there's not going to be a red wave either come this fall.
That there is going to be a red wave, right? Isn't he saying there is going to be a red wave?
Well, that's what Donald Trump says. There's going to be a red wave. And I think it's another example of the alternate reality presidency.
Susan, stick around if you can. Carlos and Sabrina, thank you for being here. I'm going to take a quick break. And then I think we're kind of going back to the future, back to the 70s, reportedly planning to revoke other security clearances from other former officials who have been critical of President Trump. Let's talk about it now with Ralph Peters, a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and former Fox News military analyst. Thank you for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
I'm glad to be here, Brian. We all have to do our part in these dreadful, dreadful days in Washington.
What is the most dreadful part about it for you?
Well, the most dreadful part is that we have a president who does not respect our system of government, who does not understand our government, who's not interested in understanding our government, who believes that the Constitution is a menu from which he can choose only the most delectable items, who disdains career bureaucrats, who doesn't respect the Constitution. So, I mean, that's one thing, but the evil twin of that is that I believe, as a former Russia analyst for most of my career, and having worked directly with Russian intelligence services, I am convinced that the President of the United States is enthralled to Vladimir Putin. There is no other way to explain his behavior, and he perfectly fits the profile of the kind of people the Russians target. So when it comes to worries, you know, Trump gives us something new to worry about virtually every day, but it's important not to lose sight of the overall picture, is that this is a distinctly un-American president who really doesn't seem to like America very much, certainly doesn't respect it, and he's a president who appears to be enthralled to a foreign power, a hostile foreign power. I mean, this is unbelievable to me. I could never have foreseen this. I was a pretty good analyst, made a lot more good calls than bad calls. I never could have foreseen this, to use a cliched word, this Orwellian situation.
When you sound the alarm the way you're doing right now, do you worry that it has the opposite of effect of your intent? That you actually scare people off or make them tune out by saying such harsh things about the president?
No, I don't worry about it, because I refuse to calculate what I say based on who it might please or who might displease. We've got plenty of that in Washington. What we need is people who will speak honestly and say what they believe and not worry about who it offends. I am just sick and tired of people hedging and hemming and hawing. This is a president of the United States who is a danger to the republic. And Brian, look, the only reason I am here today on this show, or any show, isn't because I'm enamored with the chance to be on television. It's because, again, we all need to do our part. These are parlous times. It is not hyperbole to say that this man and his henchmen and henchwomen constitute a real threat to our republic. We will survive it, but there is real damage.
How much do you blame your former network, Fox News? You have called it a destructive propaganda machine when you resigned earlier this year. Are they partly at fault for propping up Trump?
Well, certainly they're, of course. I mean, I left Fox because as a former military officer who took an oath to the Constitution, I could not be part of a channel that to me was assaulting the Constitution, the constitutional order, the rule of law. But that said, Fox isn't immoral, it's amoral. It was opportunistic. Trump was just a gift to Fox, and Fox in turn is a gift to Trump. And as you observed earlier, it's a closed loop. And so people that only listen to Fox have an utterly skewed view of reality. And by the way, earlier some of your guests were describing Trump world, in terms of Republicans. The Republican Party's gone, or at least it's dormant. What we see now, the people supporting Trump are radicals, these couch potato anarchists. They're people that don't have a program to make America great again. And by the way, America's great right now. Rather, they're destructive. They want to tear things down. They want vengeance. And Trump is brilliant at that. He's done what autocrats and charlatans and false messiahs throughout history have done. He's told his core supporters, you are not to blame. You're not to blame for the mistakes you made. You're not to blame for your failures. It's them. It's the minorities. It's the immigrants. It's fake news.
It's
a deep state.
It's a very compelling story. It's a really compelling story. How do you counter that story, Ralph?
Good men and women have to fight for this country.